Everyone. Thank you very much for your patience. It's wonderful to be with everyone. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute together, we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for this moment. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for the opportunity of this moment to share in the blessings of Torah, which is both the writings, the deeds, and the relationships that we have within us and before us. We will go ahead and read through the English translation of our Torah portion, then I'll share with you a focus study about it, and then we'll open it up for our collective conversation about it. I'll share with you the opening verses and then offer others an opportunity to read as well. On the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a calf of the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and bring them before Adonai. And speak to the Israelites, saying, Take a he-goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, yearlings without blemish for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for an offering of well-being to sacrifice before Adonai, and a meal offering with oil mixed in. For today Adonai will appear to you." Richard, would you like to read?
Thank you. They brought to the front of the tent of meeting the things that Moses had commanded, and the whole community came forward and stood before the Lord. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded that you do, that the presence of the Lord may appear to you." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Come forward to the altar and sacrifice your sin offering and your burnt offering, making expiation for yourself and for the people, and sacrifice the people's offering and make expiation for them, as the Lord has commanded." Aaron came forward to the altar and slaughtered his calf of sin offering. Aaron's sons brought the blood to him. He dipped his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar, and he poured out the rest of the blood on the base of the altar. The fat, the kidneys, and the protuberance of the liver from the sin offering he turned into smoke on the altar, as the Lord had commanded Moses. And the flesh and the skin were consumed in fire outside the camp. Then he slaughtered the burnt offering. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, and he dashed it against all sides of the altar. They passed the burnt offering to him in sections, as well as the head, and he turned it into smoke on the altar. He washed the entrails and the legs and turned them into smoke on the altar and the burnt offerings.
Thank you so much. June, would you like to continue there at verse 15?
Thank you, Rabbi. Next, he brought forward the people's offering. He took the goat for the people's purification offering and slaughtered it and presented it as a purification offering like the previous one. He brought forward the burnt offering and sacrificed it according to regulation. He then brought forward the meal offering, and taking a handful of it, he turned it into smoke on the altar, in addition to the burnt offering of the morning. He slaughtered the ox and the ram, the people's sacrifice of well-being. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, which he dashed against every side of the altar. And the fat parts of the ox and the ram, the broad tail, the covering fat, the kidneys, and the protuberances of the liver. They laid these fat parts over the breasts, and Aaron turned the fat parts into smoke on the altar, and elevated the breasts and the right thighs as an elevation offering before the Lord, as Moses had commanded. Aaron lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them, and he stepped down after offering the purification offering, the burnt offering, and the offering of well-being. Moses and Aaron then went inside the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came forth from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat parts on the altar. And all the people saw and shouted and fell on their faces.
Thank you. And Margot, would you like to read a little bit starting at the very start of chapter 10?
Now Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it, and they offered it before the Lord alien fire, which he had not enjoined upon them. And fire came forth from the Lord and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord meant when he said, through those near me, I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people." And Aaron was silent.
Thank you so much. Let me call upon Jim. Would you like to continue there at verse 4?
Thank you, Rabbi. Moses called upon Mishael and Zephon, sons of Uzi, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, "Come forward and carry your kinsmen away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp." They came forward and carried them out of the camp and their tunics as Moses had ordered. And Moses said to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not bury your heads, and do not rend your clothing, lest you die and anger strike with the whole community. But your kinsmen, all of the house of Israel, shall bewail the burning that Adonai has wrought. And so do not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting, lest you die. For Adonai's anointing oil is upon you." And they did as Moses had bidden. And Adonai spoke to Aaron, saying, "Drink no wine or other intoxicant, you or your sons, when you enter the tent of meetings, that you may not die. This is a law for all time throughout the ages. For you must distinguish between the sacred and the profane, and between the unclean and the clean. And you must teach the Israelites all the laws which Adonai has imparted to them through Moses."
Thank you so much. Robert, would you like to continue there at verse 12?
Yes, thank you. And Moses spake unto Aaron and unto Eleazar and unto Ithamar, his sons that were left, "Take the meat offering that remaineth of the offerings of the Lord made by fire, and eat it without leaven beside the altar, for it is most holy. And ye shall eat it in the holy place, because it is thy due and thy sons' due of the sacrifices of the Lord made by fire, for so I am commanded. And the wave breast and heave shoulder shall ye eat in a clean place, thou and thy sons and thy daughters with thee. For they be thy due and thy sons' due, which are given out of the sacrifices of peace offerings of the children of Israel. The heave shoulder and the wave breast shall they bring with the offerings made by fire of the fat, to wave it for a wave offering before the Lord. And it shall be thine and thy sons with thee, by a statute forever, as the Lord hath commanded. And Moses diligently sought the goat of the sin offering, and behold, it was burnt. And he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron, which were left alive, saying, "Wherefore have ye not eaten the sin offering in the holy place, seeing it is most holy? And God hath given it you to bear the iniquity of the congregation, to make atonement for them before the Lord. Behold, the blood of it was not brought in within the holy place. Ye should indeed have eaten it in the holy place, as I commanded." And Aaron said unto Moses, "Behold, this day have they offered their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord, and such things have befallen me. And if I had eaten the sin offering today, should it have been accepted in the sight of the Lord?" And when Moses heard that, he was content.
Thank you so much, Robert. And Dave, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 11?
Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the Israelite people thus. These are the creatures that you may eat from among all the land animals. Any animal that has true hoofs, with clefts through the hoofs, and that chews the cud, such you may eat. The following, however, of those that either chew their cud or have true hoofs, you shall not eat. The camel, although it chews the cud, has no true hoofs. It is impure for you. The daemon, although it chews the cud and has no true hoofs, it is impure for you. The hare, although it chews the cud and has no true hoofs, it is impure for you. The swine, although it has true hoofs, with the hoofs cleft through, it does not chew the cud. It is impure for you. You shall not eat of their flesh or touch their carcasses. They are impure for you. These you may eat of all that live in the water. Anything in the water, whether in the seas or in the streams, that has fins and scales, those you may eat. But anything in the sea or in the streams that has no fins and scales, among all the swarming things of the water and among all the other living creatures that are in the water, they are an abomination for you. And an abomination for you they shall remain, for you shall not eat of their flesh, and you shall abominate their carcasses. Everything in the water that has no fins and scales shall be an abomination for you.
Thank you, Dave. Let me invite David and Susan if you'd like to continue there at verse 13.
Thank you. The following you shall abominate among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, and the black vulture, the kite, falcons of every variety, all varieties of raven, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, hawks of every variety, the little owl, the cormorant, and the great owl, the white owl, the pelican, and the bat, and the bustard, the stork, herons of every variety, the hoopoe, and the bat.
Every swarming thing of flying creatures that goes on four, it is a detestable thing to you, except you shall eat this out of every swarming thing of flying creatures that goes on four, that which has jointed legs above its feet to leap by them on the earth. You shall eat these out of them, the locusts by its kind, and the bald locust by its kind, and the cricket by its kind, and the grasshopper by its kind, and every swarming thing of flying creatures that has four legs. It is a detestable thing to you. And you will become impure by these. Everyone who touches the carcass will be impure until evening, and everyone who carries their carcass shall wash his clothes and be impure until evening. By every animal that has a hoof and does not have a split of hooves and does not regurgitate its cud, they are impure to you. Everyone who touches them will be impure. And everyone that goes on its paws among all the animals that go on four, they are impure to you. Everyone who touches their carcass will be impure until evening. And one who carries their carcass shall wash his clothes and be impure until evening. They are impure to you.
Thank you so much, both of you. Rose, would you like to continue there at verse 29?
$29.
Yes.
Oh, okay. The following shall be impure for you from among the things that swarm on the earth: the mole, the mouse, and great lizards of every variety, the gecko, the land crocodile, the lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. Those are for you the impure among all the swarming things. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be impure until evening. and anything on which one of them falls when dead shall be impure, be it any article of wood or a cloth or a skin or a sack. Any such article that can be put to use shall be dipped in water, and it shall remain impure until evening, then it shall be pure. And if any of those falls into an earthen vessel, everything inside it shall be impure, and the vessel itself you shall break. As to food that may be eaten, it shall become impure if it came in contact with water. As to any liquid that may be drunk, it shall become impure if it was inside any vessel. Everything on which the carcass of any of them falls should be impure. An oven or stove shall be smashed. They are impure, and impure they shall remain for you. However, a spring or cistern in which water is collected shall be pure, but whoever touches such a carcass in it shall be impure. If such a carcass falls upon seed grain that is to be sown, it is pure. But if water is put on the seed, and any part of the carcass falls upon it, it shall be impure from you.
Thank you so much. And Catherine, would you like to pick up there at verse 39?
Thank you, Rabbi. If an animal that you may eat has died, anyone who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. Anyone who eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes and remain unclean until evening. And anyone who carries its carcass shall wash his clothes and remain unclean until evening. Things that swarm upon the earth are an abomination. They shall not be eaten. You shall not eat among all the things that swarm upon the earth anything that crawls on its belly, or anything that walks on fours, or anything that has many legs, for they are an abomination. You shall not draw abomination upon yourselves through anything that swarms. You shall not make yourselves unclean therewith, and thus become unclean. For I, Adonai, am your God. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy. For I am holy. You shall not make yourselves unclean through any swarming thing that moves upon the earth. For I, Adonai, am he who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall be holy, for I am holy.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Let me invite Kath, would you like to read our concluding verses there at 46?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. These are the instructions concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move in water, and all creatures that swarm on earth, for distinguishing between the impure and the pure, between the living things that may be eaten and the living things that may not be eaten.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a focus study about this week's portion. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out at this point. And the book of Leviticus as a whole is primarily a series of lists of instructions about how things are to be done. And there are actually, in the entire book of Leviticus, only two narrative elements, that is, two stories that appear. And one of those sections within which there's an actual story of something happening is this week's Torah portion. And of course, that's a story about what happens with Nadav and Abihu, Aaron's sons, when they bring what's described in the text as alien fire, strange fire, and into the sanctuary. And they are apparently consumed before God. So that little piece there is what I'd like to focus on, and perhaps draw an overall lesson about why is Torah presenting that to us at this point? What does the composition, if you will, of this piece that we call Parshat Shemini, why does it contain this story? So if you have the study sheet, I have here those verses about Nadav and Abihu. Nadav and Abihu offered strange fire before Adonai, and fire came forth from Adonai and consumed them. And then immediately after that, we have these words, and Aaron was silent. So again, I'm looking at this as a work of art, and I'm trying to understand why the artist introduced this particular element to the overall composition. And I'm also intrigued, of course, with Aaron's silence, and what does that bring to this work of art as well? Because one can interpret Aaron's silence in many different ways. I'm looking at it as an element of the composition, and the silence there, for me, is an expression of the absence of any kind of justification, the absence of any kind of rationalization, the absence of any kind of explanation. It is just silence in the face of the inexplicable. It is a empty space, if you will, in the middle of the tearing of this fabric of this book of Leviticus. So far, there has been this just seemingly flawless flow of the book of Leviticus, just a recitation of the rules of how to offer sacrifices, and then everything breaks apart with this incident with Nadav and Abihu. And I'd just like to have in the back of our minds, as we think about this piece, that in just a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be observing Passover, and we're going to be having a Passover Seder. And the Passover Seder starts off rather seamlessly. That is, as every, if you will, holiday or Shabbat dinner starts, which is the lighting of candles, the blessing of the children, the blessing over a wine, the washing of hands. And then what would happen next is we would then normally recite a blessing over this beautiful braided bread we call challah. And instead in Passover, instead of the challah, we lift up the matzah at this moment in the Seder. And what does the leader do? The leader takes a middle piece of matzah and breaks it. And at that moment, the normality of what would be a regular holiday or Shabbat dinner completely breaks open. The breaking of the matzah then, in a sense, is what provokes what happens next in the Seder, which is all these children will say, what is going on? This is not the way things are normally supposed to happen. Normally we do things this way, but now we're doing things that way. And from that moment on, the rest of the evening is unlike an elder kind of introducing and giving instruction and giving direction the way Leviticus does. Instead, the rest of the evening is more like child's play. It is the child's form of discourse, because the rest of the evening is not about a frontal teaching. The rest of the evening has to do with storytelling, the singing of songs, the hunt for things that have been hidden, and the evening itself is not allowed to come to a conclusion until the child, in a sense, says the evening is over. And the way the child says the evening is over is by finding the half of the afikomen that's been hidden. And once that child finds it, he takes that and hands it to the adult that holds the other half. And when they match up, then they can say, now the evening has come to a conclusion. So from the moment the matzah is broken, the children begin to define the pace of the evening and the way the evening is going to go and the kind of discourse that will happen. So I want to kind of keep that in mind as we look at this seemingly of this seamless flow of Leviticus as a description of what the priests are supposed to do, what kind of offerings are supposed to be presented, how they're to be presented, and so forth. All of that is disrupted by this incident with these children, Nadav and Abihu. And so I want to explore, why might the artist who has been painting this picture we call Leviticus, introduce that element onto this canvas. So that's why I'd like to explore with you a little bit. And for that, I'd like to actually turn to our painting early in our discussion to see, to get a kind of a different way of accessing what I saw, at least in this week's Torah portion. So our artist for this evening is Robert Motherwell. Robert Motherwell was born in Aberdeen, Washington, to a rather conservative family. He eventually goes to Stanford, where he studies philosophy. He then goes on to Harvard, where he does some graduate work in philosophy. And then he spends a year in France, 1939 to 1940, where he becomes enthralled with what we would call the modern painters and artists of the time. He comes back and he goes to Columbia University, where again, his intention is to continue his work in philosophy. And he takes classes as well with Meyer Shapiro, who's an art historian at Columbia. And Meyer Shapiro encourages Robert Motherwell to, instead of focusing on academic work, he encourages him to pick up painting, which is what Robert Motherwell does. And so from that point on, from about 1940 on, he then adopts painting as his way of expressing what it is he's looking for and searching for and experiencing. And he becomes a component of what at the time was called modernism. And for him, what modernism meant was freedom from dogma and an unquestioning acceptance of outdated social and cultural norms, and to have the courage to face reality in all its complexity and with all of its contradictions. And he became one of the founders of what becomes known as the abstract expressionist movement. He settles in New York, where he teaches and paints, and he becomes one of the great teachers of artists as well. And he emphasizes the importance of setting aside one's preconceptions. And he himself engages and encourages others to engage in autonomous writing and painting. That is, to let go of what it is you think you're going to do, and instead to allow the unplanned to surface, to break through the planned and the certain. And for him, it's essential that art is that which refuses to spell out everything. And so what prevails for him in his studies and his work are questions and the journey to explore those questions. So here we have this painting that he did, I believe it was in 1949, called, it's an Untitled Red and Gray. On the one hand, there's something quite simple about both the form and the colors that are there. There is internally a gray rectangle, and then it is housed within a larger red rectangle, which if you look online, you'll see that the red rectangle has striations of white going through it. And then in between the red rectangle and the gray rectangle, he has cut out some white paper and trimmed in between the red and the gray this white paper. So it's actually an acrylic with a collage of paper pasted onto it. So on the one hand, you have the simplicity of these contrasts of the two shapes and the two colors. You have the gray representing perhaps coolness, the red representing perhaps passion. You have the gray representing perhaps the interiority aspect of life, and the red representing perhaps the exteriority dimension of life. You have the gray representing the shadow dimensions, and the red representing incandescence. So we have these two images that are somehow connected, and they are in perhaps tension with one another. And when I looked at this image this week, I really did think of Passover, because I thought of the doorways of the Israelites, and I thought about the lintel, where one is supposed to spread the blood of the sacrificed animal as a way for the angel of death to pass over the homes of the Israelites. And I looked at this gray, and I thought, there's a shadow aspect there. And perhaps the shadow aspect represents something that even as the Israelites were on the verge of liberation, maybe they still carry that shadow dimension of their own experience with them. And we see as they go on their journey that is indeed an element that they still carry with them, and they are still acting out and trying to overcome. And for me, it was a lesson that even when we are in our most enlightened moments, or when we have our own experiences of revelation, we carry within us that shadow experience that we have, that shadow self. And those are ways in which we ourselves are constantly dealing with those tensions. So here we have this notion about what has happened here with Nadav and Abihu. This moment is really a moment that we have been heading towards for almost 2 months. It's been almost 2 months ago that the instructions were given about build a Mishkan and I will dwell among them in their midst. It's been like 6, 7, almost 8 weeks since that was first mentioned. And now this portion is supposed to be the climax of 2 months of reading about the Mishkan, reading about its materials, reading about its construction. It is in this portion that is supposed to be the capstone of all of that, the inauguration of the Mishkan, the first offering of the Mishkan. This is the moment when all that work will come to fruition, when an offering will be made and God's presence will fill the Mishkan and the community. And what happens after that first offering by Aaron? Nadav and Abihu offer something of their own. And we have this horrific event of their being consumed. Why does Torah want to introduce that element? What is the purpose of that element on this canvas? And why would it want to interrupt this culmination of weeks and weeks and weeks of preparation, of our reading, of our heading towards this moment? So I want to suggest that Torah perhaps is reminding us and asking us to consider whether what it's sharing with us is just a text that is all about what's predictable and certain, or whether it's also introducing and saying there's also doubt, there's also uncertainty, that there's not only speech and oration that's going on, but as Aaron represents and as an element on this canvas, there's also silence. There's also the sense of the bewilderment in the face of the inexplicable. So I want to suggest that Torah may be asking us to consider whether the way that we've been presented is just a seamless continuity, or whether there's also fragmentation, and whether that fragmentation serves a purpose. And that indeed is, in a sense, what our artist Robert Motherwell is saying. He's saying there's value in fragmentation. And that goes back to his understanding of the need to disrupt oneself as well as the world around one if one wants to develop and move on. So let me share with you, Robert Motherwell was not Jewish, and I want to share with you an insight from someone who also was not, who is not Jewish, but is perhaps has one of the greatest Jewish teachings, if you will, of anyone I've ever read. And that's the great Protestant theologian, Walter Brueggemann. I encourage people to get to know him. This is from an article he wrote called A Fissure Always Uncontained. It's number 3 on our study sheet. Jewish ways of reading yield fragments. The God of this tradition leaves traces. This is a text and a God and a people and a reading habit that give their due to fissure. The rich textual witness to that dislocation, exile, is sufficient evidence that Israel did not know what to say any more than we do in our moment of fissure. As a consequence of not knowing, Israel said many things. Here is an example of a text within our Bible that expresses what Walter Brueggemann is getting at in terms of fissure and its importance. And if you turn over on the study sheet number 4, I have verses from Psalm 89. I will sing of Adonai's steadfast love forever. To all generations I will proclaim your faithfulness with my mouth. I declare your steadfast love is confirmed forever. There in the heavens you establish your faithfulness. Yet you have rejected, spurned, and become enraged at your anointed. You have repudiated the covenant with your servant. You have dragged his dignity in the dust. O Adonai, where is your steadfast love of all which you swore to David in your faithfulness? Here in this psalm, as Walter Brueggemann points out, there are core claims of joyful celebration of faith and of anguished disappointment that stand together. They are in tension, a tension which is unresolved. So to forsake a final word, to let go of the desire for control, is really the beginning of freedom. That is what Walter Brueggemann reminds us of, the richness of our way of reading this material, of how these aspects of both celebration and anguish are allowed to stand together without a resolution about them. But here is from Edmond Jabé. Edmond Jabé was born, I believe it was in Egypt. He flees and goes to France. And he wrote a number of books, one called The Book of Shares, and his sense of disruption, both with his own having to flee and then what happens in Europe, he is full of both. Well, let me share with you his writing here. You have opted for security, tranquility for the answer. I have chosen insecurity and worry, the question. I mark time at the edge of life, whereas you have already reached death's shore to die on the threshold. For Jabé, what drives one forward is the question rather than the answer. And so as we head towards our Passover Seder, at the very beginning of it, when this eruption of childlike voices happens, they say, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh. And interestingly enough, originally, that formulation which appears in the early rabbinic writing, the Mishnah, is not a question, it's a statement. It's, wow, how different is this evening from all other evenings? It's an expression of awe and wonder. And over time, that sense of awe and wonder then becomes formulated as a question, because sometimes we need to ask the question in order to reawaken in ourselves that sense of awe and wonder, rather than taking it for granted. And one final commentary, and then we will have our open conversation, is from Allen Ginsberg. Allen Ginsberg was a poet who, like Robert Motherwell, if you will, was insistent upon living in defiance of convention. He was someone who was driven to explore, even perhaps to the point of madness, and to return from those explorations and to share with us in poetry what it was he uncovered and what he found. He died in 1997 on a Shabbat, on the Shabbat when this Torah portion, Shemini, is read. On this Torah portion when Nadav and Abihu have defied the conventions and sought to explore something that was not prescribed. And here is what Allen Ginsberg wrote in his poem, This is About Death. Art recalls the memory of his true existence to whoever has forgotten that being is the one thing all the universe shouts. Only return of thought to its source will complete thought. Only return of activity to its source will complete activity. Listen to that. Here is Allen Ginsberg, who is basically, I think, telling us that the sense of settlement, of definition, of predictiveness, which is what a noun in a sense represents. It's a settled meaning. He says that's not what the universe is shouting about. What the universe is shouting about is being, is activity, is a verb, is an ongoing dynamic of development. And that's what he says we should listen to. So with that, I'd like to open it up and see how you experience this week's Torah portion and what occurred to you and how you felt about it. So let me call upon Jay and Rose to start with. So Jay, and please.
Thank you, Rabbi, for a very enlightening, uplifting session. I'll be brief. I may have talked about this particular commentary last year. Somehow it's coming back to me. And it reminds me because we will perpetually have questions, even from people that don't even ever have thought about kosher. We'll always have commentary and questions and all of that about kosher and pig and all of that. But when you look at the Torah, there was a commentator named Salanter, Salanter. He said, it's only twice in the entire Torah, only twice, that we're commanded not to eat pork, but every single Jew knows that's forbidden. But the Torah commands us many, many more times to refrain from gossip and hurtful speech, yet many observant Jews do not sense that they are violating the Torah when they speak ill of others. And that, to me, that's, we're worried about the physical, we're worried about the pork, about the pig. That kind of is interesting. The other thing that I don't think I noted last year, but if you look at the Hebrew in verse or sentence 42 towards the very end, and it says, Kol holech al gahon v'chol holech al arba. It says that it crawls on its belly, and that word gahon, it says, the word translated as belly, gahon, the letter vav is written very large, it's large, for it is said to be the actual middle of the Torah. Now, I want to know who compiles this. I want to know who counted the seeds in a pomegranate, okay? So I'm still trying to find that guy, the 613. Okay, it says, the large vav symbolizes the unique upright posture of a human being. There is something repugnant about a person who crawls instead of standing up for what he or she believes, foregoing the unique upright posture of a human being, which is symbolized by the enlarged letter Vav. But the book of Leviticus is concerned with our use of words, vows, false oaths, hurtful speech, teaching us to sanctify what goes forth from our mouths. In its exposition of the rules of kosher, to teach us to sanctify what goes into our mouths as well. It would also remind us that there is a moral difference between eating an apple and eating a slice of meat. The latter requires taking the life of one of God's creatures. The Jew who lives by the dietary laws is constantly kept aware of that. That's my comment.
Beautiful. Thank you. This is very rich to bring in all that material, and I love the piece about the pointing out the way that letter is written, the sense of uprightness. Let me call upon Rose and then Catherine. Go ahead, Rose.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. Couple of things. First of all, if you really look at it, Pesach is the only children's holiday. Children are absolutely essential for this holiday because the only way you can fulfill the commandment is if the children are present to teach the next generation. The other thing I had to say was I've been trying to read the New Testament, and it's very slow going because it's not very dramatic. And I think you were touching on this is the quality of surprise that happens in the Old Testament. You know, you're just kind of going along and you think you know what's going to happen, and then out of nowhere, you know, a different thing happens. You know, and this happens at several points in the Torah that I won't go into. But the thing with Nadav and Avihu does kind of happen out of nowhere, and you can say it's a cautionary tale, you know, to do everything by the book. But it could also be something like the postman always rings twice, because if you look back into Exodus, the incident of the golden calf, which, by the way, is one of the few places that Aaron actually speaks in the Torah. You know, Moshe says, you know, first he speaks to Bnei Israel, said, oh, you know, oh, Moshe's coming, and, you know, okay, I'll make the idol for you tomorrow, and all this. And then when Moshe comes out, he says, you know, WTF, Aaron. Then Aaron says, well, you know, they're bad and they made me do this, etc. And then nothing happens to him. And then all of a sudden, I mean, I'm not the first one to say this, you know, what goes around comes when the postman always rings twice. But Aaron is silent through most of the Torah. He doesn't say very much. And it is kind of strange. But what's even weirder is what Moshe does. He doesn't say anything to Aaron like, oh, you know, this is terrible. I'm so sad for you. You've lost your sons. I've lost my nephews. He just says, oh, well, they didn't do it right. You know, so I have always wondered if Moshe was on the spectrum. That's all I have to say.
Okay, so I'm going to call upon some other people, make sure everyone who wants to speak has an opportunity to speak, and then we'll swing back around, capture some of these thoughts. Let me call upon Catherine, then Richard here. Please, Catherine.
Yes, contemplating the painting, at first glance, one sees an opening there, a possibility of an opening. But in fact, the sort of uniformity of the gray sort of transforms it into an impediment, and an impediment that sort of stands out to us because of the white around it. And so I'm thinking of that as a metaphor for the silence, for Aaron's silence, that he encounters this tremendous impediment in the ritual proceedings of the offerings, and one can only simply have to confront this impediment and reflect upon it. That's all one can do when faced with this gray.
Okay, Catherine, okay, this is, I hadn't seen that, so I just, you just inspired something, which is, what you got me to think about was the image that we encountered earlier in our readings about the presence of God filling up the Mishkan. Do you remember this? And Moses could not enter into
Yes.
it. And so what you got me to think about was, to the extent that we fill up a single framework with the presence of an authority, even a divine authority, it inhibits our capacity to enter into this space. And so maybe there's this developmental aspect of that the importance is to have a dispersion rather than a concentration of that kind of energy in order to be able to have that obstacle removed and be able to enter into the framework. So I'm just playing with those notions that you've presented. So thank you so much for that. Also, Rich. Let me call upon Richard here.
Thank you, Rabbi. When I read this again, as I do every year, I came up with a new thought that I hadn't thought of before, because it says that they did this thing with this stuff that they weren't asked to do. And it made me think, well, you haven't been asked to do this. You didn't get it. It wasn't sanctified. And you're carrying ahead with this. And I thought of the commandment. Don't take the name of the Lord in vain. Don't do this for a vain purpose. They've got some ego involved here and there, in the same way that their father had when he made the idol. There's something wrong there that group is doing that. And when you've got the gray, you said there's bits of white tape or white paper to show the seams there. And what I looked at that was, that's how the light gets in. That this business with what the boys did and what their dad did, it's hard to wrestle with, but it's the wrestling that's important for us, not to come to a black and white decision about, but to just live with that. That sheds light on what's going on here, because the Haftorahs surrounding this are all about the forgiveness and about the need for sanctions and sanctity, and both the kavanah, but also to go by the letter of the rules of doing these sacrifices. And that's a priest's job. It's not, and we had one in there where everybody's getting an expiation, bring this cow or but if it's a priest that he does something wrong and finds out later that he did it wrong, he has brought shame about along the whole tribe. And so there is it's like rabbi can't go into a unkosher restaurant and even have a glass of water. And there's something has to be very rigid about that. And I think this is speaking to that. These boys have a ego desire to be part of the thing, and their father didn't teach them otherwise. So I'm not surprised at all that we're put there, and I think that is a break in the wall, but the light that's coming in there is giving us some perhaps ability to not be too upset that they're getting shafted. They'll go on, they'll come back again someday.
Thank you, Richard. And someone else who has their hand up, they want to share something? Otherwise, I'll begin to wrap things up together by trying to weave some threads here that have been placed on this beautiful table. So in her comments, what Rose brings up is that this text that we call the Jewish Bible is an unresolved text. It is a text that doesn't explain everything, that confounds at least as much, if not more, than it answers. And it is a text that ends in the book of Chronicles with a sense of lack of resolution, whether those who are living in exile will stay in exile or whether they will go back to the land of Israel. And that sense of lack of resolution, I want to suggest, is the primary lesson that this body of wisdom is trying to share with us, that if you want to live in this world, you have to live with that lack of resolution, because that's the only way to live with a sense of peace in this moment. That the only way to create a sense of fulfillment is to also live a life aware of fracture. And rather than avoiding it or suppressing it or seeking to always explain everything. And so what's happening here, as I see it anyway, when I look at this painting that I call Parshat Shemini, why is it having this disruption of this, what should be a moment of glorification and celebration and resolution of the Mishkan? Instead, the artist I'll call Torah, places on the canvas these rips in this canvas, if you will, incises the canvas, wanting us to be aware that just when we should expect this beautiful painting that is as perfect in every respect, instead we see it shredded. Why? I think because it's trying to remind us that the desire to be able to have an explanation for everything, for being able to predict how everything will go, that everything will go perfectly, is a kind of conceit of control that we all want to have in life. And to have that kind of conceit of control is, if nothing else, the highest form of idolatry. It's the form of the worship of self, that we can guarantee that if we do certain things, that we will have certain outcomes. And Torah is trying to help us to avoid that pain of conceit and illusion.
Oh, wow.
And so, to me, it is as what Allen Ginsberg reminds us, is don't look at those things which have become settled in their meaning and have reached a point of static definition, because that's the way of death. That's what Jabez is saying. That's the way of death. The only way of life is to constantly break things apart and engage in the process of reconstitution, to break and reconstitute. And that if we listen to that dynamic, then we will overcome the pain of death and the pain of what it means to be a mortal being. If we listen to that, we listen to our children, we listen to the child within us, if you will, because one of the dramatic moments in the Seder is when we send a child to the door and say, open the door to what we don't know. And it's not, of course, not just an actual child that's doing that. The Seder is saying to us, you need to become a child and have the sense to be the child who explores the unknown, to overcome your adult sense of, I need to know and how everything works and be able to explain how everything works. I need to be certain about how everything works. That we need to embrace that child and say, we need to open the door to what's beyond, because the unknown is where we find what kind of a person we are. and we find more than we had expected. And that's the journey that we're on. And it's so great and wonderful to be on that kind of a journey with a community of people who have courage, who have faith, who have the faith of the willingness to explore even that gray inside of us, that gray interiority of the unknown and the unexplored. To explore it with you is a great gift. I want to thank each and every one of you. God bless you all. Be well. I look forward to our next gathering.
Thank you.
so
Wonderful
much.
teaching.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.